Sales cycle or buying cycle, if you want to be super successful in sales, watch, observe, listen, and understand what the buyer is doing. I was really fortunate early in my career where I was exposed to some of the work of people like John Bosworth and Neil Rackham, who did a lot of research around what we call the science of selling, and which we still use in a lot of our teaching and our coaching today. And one of the things, the great things, the insightful things that came out of the research, particularly from Rackham and Bosworth in the studies that's published in books like The New Solution Selling and Spin Selling, which we recommend. It's fantastic work, and from our perspective, it's still very much real and alive today. So one of the concepts that came out of this was that salespeople and sales organizations were often focused around their sales process. And what they found was that the sales process was very salesperson, sales organization specific. And what it sometimes or often ignored was the buyer's process. So what came out of the research, one of the big findings was the concept of a buying cycle, and a buying cycle applies to any kind of a purchase which is a major purchase. So it applies to people purchasing a motor vehicle, it applies to people purchasing real estate of any description, and it applies to business selling, be it low value transaction or high value transaction. So it's really applicable, and we apply it across everything we do. So we say, if you're in a sales process and you want to know what to do, the key to what you should do is just have a look at what the buyer's doing. And if you can see what the buyer's doing, and if you're in an organization where there's a number of levels of people in the organization, if you can see what the person in the purchasing department is doing, if you can see what the general manager who's responsible is doing, if you can see what the other people in their buying process are doing, you can work out quite precisely what behaviours and techniques you should be using at that particular point in time in their process. And I stress their process, not your process. So I want you to grab a bit of paper now. I want you to draw a big circle on the paper, and I want you to divide it into 6 chunks. So 6 chunks of the cheese. The first chunk is from midnight to 2 o'clock. The second chunk is a slice from 2 around to 4 on the clock. The third slice is 4 to 6. Fourth slice is 6 to 8. The fifth slice is 8 to 10. And the final slice, top left of the circle, is 10 to 12. So now we've got 6 chunks in a piece of cheese, and we're going to name each of those chunks. So the first chunk that goes from 12 till 2, and I won't continue to repeat where we are. We're just going to move around the clock now clockwise. So the first chunk is called business as usual. The second chunk is called identification of needs. The third chunk is called active evaluation of solution. The fourth chunk is called organization alignment. The fifth chunk is decision. And the sixth chunk, top left, is implementation. So you now have names on those 6 chunks of the cheese, and we're going to talk about each phase. So the first phase is business as usual. In business as usual or life as usual, people are going through life, and around whatever product or solution it is, they're pretty comfortable. If it's a car, a vehicle, they're pretty comfortable. If it's a house, they're enjoying their house, their townhouse, their apartment they're living in, they're pretty comfortable, not think about doing anything. If it's in a business, the business is going fine and they're tracking along nicely. And this phase is often called even keel. And it's a stage where the business is saying, hey, great, happy to look at some stuff, but frankly, everything's going okay around here. So it's a phase where the potential buyer of your solution is not looking to buy. In the second stage, which is called identification of needs, the buyer has moved from, I don't need to change anything, to, maybe I'll change something. So they're thinking about their vehicle or their real estate or their product solution for a major organization. They're starting to think, maybe we should have a look at this. Maybe there is a problem or opportunity. It's the word POP, which flows through everything we teach and coach. Maybe there's a problem or opportunity we can solve, and maybe it's worth solving. So let's have a look at it. Next chunk we called active evaluation. So after identification of needs, sometimes the customer will continue the journey and say, great, we need to do something. Or oftentimes also the customer will say, we've had a look at the alternatives, And from business perspective, might be some advantages changing, but for now, from budget perspective, there's other things we can spend our money on, so we won't move. So they actually go back around the circle anti-clockwise to business as usual and continue on. For the customers who go into active evaluation, this is when they're online. They're researching solutions. They're talking to sales reps, account managers just like you. They're interviewing companies. They're getting companies to do presentations, and they may be going into a tender process. So they're actively looking for a solution, and they've allocated budget, and they know what their buying criteria are. Next phase is a phase where the customer has probably almost made a decision, and we call this organizational alignment, which is kind of a bit of a weird title, but what they're doing in the company at this stage is they've made a decision in principle, and they're getting all of their ducks in a row in the company. So they're making sure that budget's all sorted, all of the key stakeholders are behind the solution and are going to support the implementation, and they're making sure that any little issues or concerns that they may have are ticked off before they formally make the purchase. A little note on this phase, organizational alignment. Often in an opportunity where you think you're doing well, you think there's a reasonable chance of you winning, you're getting good feedback, you know that you've ticked most of the boxes, you've met the matrix, and you know that you're in a really competitive position, and there's a high probability, you might have this rated in your pipeline as or in Salesforce as an 80%. Often at this time in organizational alignment, everything goes quiet. Why does it go quiet? The organization has things to do internally to line everything up before they go back to the selected provider and formally make the decision. A quick tip on that. Sometimes when they're in this phase here, there's silence, and there are some issues around your solution which haven't been resolved or haven't been answered adequately. No offense to you, but this is what's going on in the background. So the best sales behavior at that particular time would be to ideally get front and center in front of the customer and ask them in an appropriate way, what is it that we haven't resolved and what concerns do you have around our solution? Because we would like to resolve those in your mind. So if you can articulate those to us, we will go away and we'll do work to allay those issues, concerns or fears that you might have. Often I see salespeople almost harassing the customer for a decision. The sales manager's harassing the salesperson, and it's when's the decision, when's the decision, when's the decision. The best behavior at that point is pull behavior with the customer, not push behavior, which is, hey, understand, feels like, sounds like some concerns. Let us help you put those concerns aside. And maybe it's a reference story, maybe it's a case study, maybe they can talk to an existing customer that you have that's a bit like them, so on and so forth. Next stage is decision. Customer's made a decision, and then the customer moves to implementation. So that's the buying cycle. How is this useful? How this is useful is a couple of things. Firstly, to help your selling process, there are specific things you could do, specific skills and techniques you could use at each part of the process that would be most productive for the customer and to allow you to successfully move that customer around that circle in a reasonable time frame. So let's talk about what salespeople should be doing now rather than what the customer's doing. So business as usual. We would say business as usual is actually the best place to enter a prospective customer's organization. Now, we often hear, well, why? Why wouldn't we enter when a customer's active? We've got a video around active opportunities, which I recommend you have a look at, so I won't go into great detail here. But if the opportunity is active, you've missed the first piece of the process, and from our perspective, you're behind and you've got ground to make up. So we would suggest that the best salespeople enter when the customer doesn't have the need, and they create the need by understanding what the customer's issues, challenges are, and they actually create a sales cycle and a buying cycle by using questioning and other sales techniques. In identification of needs, what should the salesperson be doing? The salesperson should be asking a lot of questions to help the customer think through what is the problem, what is the opportunity, to tease that out, to shape the problem, to size the problem, and to help the customer and yourself really clearly understand what the problem is so that the customer can understand, therefore, what the best solution might be as they continue through the process. In active evaluation, it's pretty simple what you will be doing at that stage. You'd be presenting information, you'd be asking questions, you'd be going through their process. I touched on before that one of the things around active evaluation is you're late. One of the really sophisticated sales techniques to use in active evaluation is actually to attempt to take the customer back around the circle to identification of needs. Now, this is very difficult because if you're in a procurement process, for example, the process is moving on and the response from procurement is, hey, we've done all of our needs identification. We've scoped our problem. We understand what we're doing this. We've got a business case. We understand what we're trying to achieve. We have no interest in going back and sitting with you and having you ask questions around our problem. So it can be very difficult, and you often won't be given access to the people who you need to have that conversation. But certainly in major opportunities, there is a real skill around that, and that is a very productive activity because it actually allows you to go back into identification of needs and help you position yourself maybe later on in the cycle because of your understanding as equal and better and different. If you're in a sales cycle, I've already talked about organizational alignment. If as a salesperson, if you're entering the opportunity at organizational alignment, the party's on, the party's raging. From your perspective, you probably got there way too late. It's going to be almost impossible to take the customer back. It can be done, but it's almost impossible to take the customer back around that circle. Decision is decision phase. They're appointing a supplier. They're doing all of the work moving towards an implementation. Implementation, the obvious. They're purchasing the product. They're implementing the product. Implementation is what we would call a honeymoon period. It's very difficult to access a customer around your solution if they're in the honeymoon. They've been through the process. They're on the honeymoon. They've got a new supplier. They're happy and excited. They're implementing the solution. Very difficult to enter at that particular stage. And from implementation, at some stage, it's implemented. They go into business as usual around your particular product suite or solution set, and life goes on. And at some stage, they may move into another sales cycle. But if it's a major purchase, I would say that they will be in business as usual for typically maybe 12 months to 24 months to 3 years. A little bit about the buying cycle, 6 pieces to it. Great selling is about observing the customer, watching the customer, listening to the customer, talking to a range of stakeholders and understanding exactly what the customer is doing. If you understand what the customer is doing, you understand where in that piece of cheese they are, and you understand what are the most productive and successful sales techniques, skills that I should be using.